right, welcome back to another episode of the Home Turf Podcast. This is episode 26 now at this point. Only 2 games left in Texas A&M season. And today we got an out-of-conference game that we are here to discuss. And I have a guest from the Daily Collegian. Go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I am currently the managing editor of the Daily Collegian, but this is my 3rd season covering UMass's football team. So safe to say there hasn't been a ton of exciting games in my time now basically 3 years here, because that's just not the caliber of team they've been. I have gone through a coaching change though, with Walt Bell to Don Brown. That was definitely the most exciting thing that's happened since I've been here, but it's been a lot of the same since I've been covering this team.
Now, one thing you forgot to mention is who you are. Go ahead and tell the people who I'm talking to.
Yeah, my name's Joey Alberti. Sorry. And yeah, I've just been covering football and basketball for the past few years.
All right. Now, before we go ahead and get into the meat of the episode, I do have to shout out our sponsor of this episode, because the Home Turf Podcast, as always, is sponsored by Hitch. So for all your ride sharing needs, make sure you check out Hitch. If you're needing to travel across the state, it's like Uber, but it's for longer distances. For 30% off your first 4 rides, up to $50 each ride, use code AggieNews3. That's AggieNews3. Now, thanks again to Hitch for sponsoring this episode. And let's go ahead and talk about some UMass football. So let's kind of look at this from a season in review. I've had these 2 kind of like segments I've been doing recently. But before we get into that, I want to say, what is your affiliation with UMass? This is one thing that I've been enjoying asking people, because I, for one, did not grow up as an A&M fan, but I currently go to Texas A&M for school. So were you a UMass fan growing up, or is this just kind of like you ended up going to Massachusetts? What's the deal with that?
So I grew up in Massachusetts, about 2 hours away from Amherst, sort of near Boston. And I didn't really know much at all about UMass. I just kind of came here because in-state tuition, and I wanted a sports journalism degree. And I mean, I got here my freshman year. I started doing like covering teams and stuff, but never the football team. Knew that they sucked though. And then since my sophomore year, I've been covering the football team, and yeah, that's kind of how I got going.
All right. Now, the first thing I'm going to do for season in review is describe your season in 5 words. UMass football.
Gotta
really thinking about it there.
Yeah, I gotta come up with the correct 5-word sequence, you know?
Yeah. Just let me know when you got it. So, counting on your fingers right now.
Yes, a lot of poor offensive mistakes is what I would say.
All right. And now the next thing is, what's the vibe check in Amherst? I know that this is kind of how UMass football is. I don't want to dunk on UMass too much in this episode, but UMass has kind of been one of the least successful football programs in college football, to say the least. So I don't know if, the vibe in Amherst is usually like this because is it just what's expected, or is it kind of just still down in the dumps a little bit?
Well, yeah, trust me, covering UMass football is basically trying to find different ways to dunk on this team, so to speak, without actually dunking on them, because that's all they've been dunking on themselves in essence. But the vibe around UMass in general, let me set the scene. I feel like one of the best representations of it is a Saturday afternoon of a home game. So a tailgate usually happens like every college, and you go to, the parking lot right near the stadium. Everyone's there, parents involved. Everyone's having a great time, drinking, getting drunk. And then you're thinking like, oh, these 7,000 people are going to head to the stadium after this, right? Nope. They all literally just go home or go to a restaurant or go anywhere else but McGurk Alumni Stadium. I guess I shouldn't say everyone. There's probably a few thousand that are in there. But for the most part, I'd say about 80% of the people and just about every single student either goes to a Darty or goes home.
No, that. I'm really glad that you kind of painted the scenario there, because, they say like a picture is worth 1,000 words, and you basically painted the picture for us, and you said everything without saying anything. So we kind of really get the idea of where that is. And you kind of talked a little bit about, working as a football in coverage of UMass football is kind of twisting things in a little bit of ways. You ever kind of have to find ways where you look at something and you're like, okay, maybe this could be a turning point, or maybe this could be something. Is it a lot of that, or is it just a lot of just biding your time?
Yeah, no, definitely what the first thing that you said, just because you want, as a reporter and as someone that is putting out news for people, you're going to try to find things to see if the thing that's been happening for the past now 4 years, I'd say, if there's any sign of it going to switch. I think the big sign of that was bringing in Don Brown because of his pedigree, having 5 years under Jim Harbaugh at Michigan and BC and then Arizona. So he is a Power Five coach now at UMass. That was the first big thing. And then there's more minute things within the season. And the biggest one has actually kind of happened over the recent weeks where UMass's passing game probably averaged 80 yards per game at best. They had 17 passing yards in their first game of the season, and it was bad. It was really bad. But the past couple of weeks, Brady Olson, a sophomore quarterback, has kind of been their option because they've been scrambling at quarterback. 3 different guys have started. I think 5 different ones have played. Four different quarterbacks have played. Sorry, and it seems like they actually have a passing game. They had their career or their season high in offensive yards for the second time in the past 4 years. They were over 300 passing yards. So they're starting to form a little bit more of an offensive game. They still lost to Arkansas State last week, which is a really not great team, but it's definitely it seems like it's building into a direction where they have at least a formidable passing game on the Division One
Yes.
football level.
I think it's interesting you mentioned about the passing attack. I'll pull up the numbers real quick, but UMass does average 120.3 passing yards per game, which is the sixth worst mark in the country, basically only trailing the service academies, which would be, the Air Force, the Army, the Navy, the schools that just don't pass the ball at all and truly are averaging 60 passing yards per game. So you mentioned too about the quarterbacks. Yes, there have been 4 different quarterbacks who have thrown a pass so far this season. I'll kind of bury what I wanted to focus on first and kind of talk about them just because you brought it up. Where is the quarterback situation in UMass? Because I know 2 different quarterbacks played in the last game against Central Arkansas, where UMass came the closest to winning the game that they've come all season since Stony Brook, which was the only win of the season. For those who don't know, UMass is currently 1-9 on the year. So, what is the quarterback situation looking like?
Brady Olson came into the week having his best week of the season and the best week any quarterback at UMass has had this season against UConn. And he was doing okay. He did have a pick six and 2 first half interceptions, but overall he was doing much better than what the UMass offense has gotten out of its quarterbacks. But then he got hurt. And Don Brown said earlier this week, it sounds like a concussion because he was just saying, oh, with those head injuries, you never really know. So he's honestly up in the air, it seems like, for this game at Kyle Field on Saturday, which would leave us with most likely Garrett Zero, who also played in that Arkansas State game. He's a small guy, but Don Brown loves him because he's really gritty. I think he's the most gritty quarterback that UMass has. He's small, but he kind of does what he needs to do. He probably won't make too many big plays, but he will do just the little things right. I shouldn't even say that though, because no quarterback at UMass really does the little things right all the time, but he does them right more often than the other guys. He just doesn't make as many mistakes, but he also doesn't offer the upside of a Brady Olson.
So that's what you would say A&M fans could expect out of the UMass quarterback situation this coming week, is that it may be a little bit more consistent, but there will be a little bit less flair than maybe what could have been provided with some of the other guys.
It depends if Brady plays. I genuinely have no idea. I have no inside information on if he's going to play. If Brady plays, you'll see some big throws downfield, most likely to Cam Sullivan-Brown. He's kind of been the featured receiver since he's been back in the lineup. If not, with Garrett Zero, he actually didn't do too bad when he did play, but it won't be he doesn't have the arm as the other quarterbacks do.
Now, the one thing I wanted to talk about when looking at the offense is that there has been a piece that's been kind of doing better the last 3 weeks than compared to some of the other parts in the season, and that is the running game, specifically Ellis Merriweather, who just had his best performance of the season last week against Central Arkansas, or against. Wait, was it Central Arkansas? Sorry, I'm blanking.
Arkansas State. Arkansas State.
Arkansas State. Yes, that's what it was. Now, talk a little bit about Ellis Merriweather. He was a 3-star transfer out of Garden City Community College in Kansas. What have you seen out of him the last few weeks? And do you think that that could be something that UMass could lean on going into this game against A&M?
So let me actually go back to last season when Ellis had a much better season than he's had this year so far. The offense last season with the quarterbacks, Brady Olson was, as a true freshman, the starting quarterback for most of the year, but the passing game was just getting worse and worse and really bad to the point where Ellis Merriweather was last year's entire offense for the Minutemen. He averaged, I think at the end of the season, like 130 rush yards per game. He was the guy that was like keeping them somewhat, not, I shouldn't even say relevant because they weren't relevant. Keeping them afloat is the proper wording. This season has not nearly been as successful for him. And I think there's an injury. So also, side note, Don Brown doesn't really disclose injuries at all to us and what they're going through and everything. So finding out injuries is very, very difficult here in Amherst. But with that being said, Ellis was injured. He was out for a couple weeks, and they actually have other scholarship running backs behind him this year. And he was the only running back on scholarship for a big chunk of last year. And I think they're trying to spread the ball out more, rightfully so, because they have some more dynamic guys, and Ellis is that power back. Ellis Merriweather, for those of you who don't know, and I assume that's a lot of Texas A&M people, what you should expect from him is this big hulking man that is very, very powerful and honestly has a little bit of elusiveness, but he will run a couple people over. Maybe not Texas A&M people, but just in general. Anyways, though, I think injuries have kind of been the big reason as to why he didn't get off to as good of a start or kind of keep on from where he was last year. But it seems like now that's finally coming back. And it's also finally coming back once the pass game is starting to become successful. So I think another big reason as to why he hasn't been as good is because no defense has really had to respect the passing game. So they could just load the box.
Yeah, you look at Ellis Merriweather listed at 6'2", 225, but you mentioned maybe a little bit more inconsistency this season. You look at, as I mentioned, best game of the season against Arkansas State this last week, had 29 carries, 122 yards, 2 touchdowns. But you look at the rest of the season, and 5 of his 8 games he's played, as you mentioned, a little bit of injury. He's only played in 8 of the team's 10 games. But in 5 out of the 8 games, he finished with under 60 rushing yards, even though he gets a good amount of carries every single game. So is there any other parts of the UMass offense that people from Texas A&M should know heading into the game? You mentioned one of the receivers being the focal point of the offense of late, or is there someone you want to focus on maybe along the offensive line or anything like that?
Offensive line, not entirely. Their left tackle is probably their best player, but I won't even get into that. I'll talk a little bit more about Cam Sullivan-Brown. He's a Penn State transfer. This is his first year here. He's a grad student, and he has proven to be their best receiver this year. And it's just by making plays downfield. He made like a triple teamed catch off a flea flicker against UConn. That was kind of insane. He's that deep play threat, but he's also just like, he's built, funny enough, they share the last name, but he's built a lot like AJ Brown of the Philadelphia Eagles. He's just kind of that big guy that makes plays like that. And another person that I want to mention really quick is Greg DeWosier. He's a running back, and he's also their kick returner. I would argue he's their most explosive playmaker on offense. He seems to make a big play happen every once and so often, which is a lot more than most people in UMass do. I know it doesn't sound like a lot, but he will probably get involved a little bit, but they don't involve him a lot because he's on the kick return team. He's someone that could break open a big play.
And then to kind of flip this around and look at the defense for Texas A&M, I know the one thing that has been the biggest concern is the rushing attacks against Texas A&M. We have allowed multiple 100-yard rushers throughout the season. I believe we've allowed 8 different running backs to go for over 100 yards. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's something that is focused on heading into the game for UMass's team. But looking at UMass's defense, what's one thing that you think is the bright spot on UMass's defense? I know when I'm just looking at the numbers and stuff, the thing that stands out to me is the front seven. There are a few athletes in particular who have put up decent numbers along the front seven. And the 2 numbers that stood out to me were Jalen Mackey and Marcus Cushney, each getting 11.5 tackles for loss, which would each rank inside the top 40 in the nation. So kind of talk about like what are the bright spots along the defense for the Minutemen?
Yeah, the defensive side is definitely much better than the offensive side just because that's Don Brown's nature. He is a defensive guy. And I think those 2 players, and Jalen Mackey and Marcus Cushney, are good. But just from the lens of someone who's been covering this team for the whole year, I think the aspect of UMass's defense that stood out the most is actually the secondary. So they have 2 really good corners in Josh Wallace and Jordan Mahoney. Jordan Mahoney, I think, is the one player, if not like one of a couple, that has both a fumble touchdown and a pick 6 this season. Josh Wallace is a very, very polished corner, I think is the right wording. Tyler Rudolph, another Penn State transfer also. He plays free safety, and he's a very sharp player. He's always making tackles. So Jalen Mackey makes the most tackles on this team, and he's always there when it's a run play. And Marcus Cushney's a great pass rusher. But I would say the secondary is what is the strength of his team. And that is not really surprising, seeing for the fact that Don Brown coaches the secondary. So he has kind of his hand on everything that they do more than anyone else on the team. So they were obviously bound to have the most success, and I'd say they have.
You kind of beat me to the punch on mentioning the secondary. Those were the 2 names in particular that I was going to bring up. Josh Wallace has an impressive 8 pass deflections on the season. And Jordan Mahoney, you mentioned kind of the versatility in the numbers that he's put up. These are some interesting numbers he has. He has 3 interceptions, 5 pass deflections, 2 forced fumbles, and 2 fumble recoveries. And you mentioned, yes, he does have a pick 6 and a fumble recovery touchdown. So he definitely has some very versatile numbers that you can see just on a stat sheet. But kind of talk about maybe what does the defense do that would possibly bring concern to Texas A&M? Because the offense has been the part that's been the worst aspect of A&M football so far this season. So what would UMass be able to do that could cause any troubles?
Don Brown's nickname, coming even before UMass and one that he's had for a while, is Dr. Blitz, because he's just known for his like master level blitz packages and everything like that. Like, he puts a lot on the defense to know in terms of different formations and different types of things. So I think just finding creative ways to get pressure, because they've definitely been doing a much better job in the past couple of weeks of getting pressure on the quarterback. So whoever, is it going to be Wegman back there at quarterback this week? Is that
Wigman should be playing, yes.
Yeah, and especially him as a freshman, just trying to find ways to rattle him, and then letting Josh Wallace and Jordan Mahoney and the rest of the secondary do their thing is what I assume they'll try to do. But also, UMass has let up a ton of rushing yards the past couple weeks against especially a team in Arkansas State that isn't necessarily a good rushing team. So I would not be surprised if Texas A&M's running backs kind of have a field day, because UMass has been allowing a lot of explosive plays, but I think they're going to try to rattle the freshman quarterback.
I think that's interesting because Jimbo Fisher specifically mentioned that exact part about the UMass defense is how many different things they kind of throw at you when it comes to getting after the quarterback. And so that's one thing that I'm interested to see how A&M adapts, because A&M has had one of the worst pass blocking offensive lines in the country, especially as of late. You look at the game that they just had against Auburn, and that was really the big flaw. You saw Connor Wigman have an amazing game in his freshman debut against Ole Miss, and then you saw him struggle a lot against Auburn, and you couldn't really even blame Connor Wigman too much because they just weren't giving him any time to really do anything. So I am interested to see kind of how they do that. And then you mentioned too, looking at how the how exactly the defensive performance against the run would be. A thing that is an interesting look for Texas A&M fans going forward into this game is that you look at that Auburn game as well. We were without our top offensive player, Devon A-Chain, because he was actually out with an injury. He had a boot on his foot. We didn't really know he wasn't going to play until right before the game. And they said that he might be able to play for this game, but it is not a 100% certainty. And so if he is not able to play against UMass, then most likely it will be a mixture of, Le'Veon Moss got a lot of time, and you just want to see what exactly A&M would do on that rushing front on offense, because it's going to give them a different chance to kind of do something different, because we don't know whether or not Devon A-Chain is going to be there. Now, to kind of look at the game, I like to do this whole expectations thing. What are your expectations for the team going into this game? Is there something you want to see UMass really capitalize on? Is there something you think that they need to do to be able to have the best performance possible? Just kind of go into what your expectations are.
I think so. Let me preface by saying I think it's going to be tough to capitalize against an SEC level team that's pissed right now because they've lost 6 straight games, and a coach of Jimbo Fisher who, say what you want, he's an SEC level coach. And I want to preface with that because I don't know how much this team is actually going to be able to do. I think the thing for UMass is to keep continuing trying to mold an offensive identity, because at the beginning of the season, like you were mentioning with the military teams, they were running, I think, 4th most in the nation running percentage wise, just behind Army, Navy, Air Force. But those teams still had more passing yards than UMass. So it was really ugly, and they're finally trying and starting to get out of that. And I think the offensive coordinator, Steve Kasula, is starting to figure some things out and get his feet under him a little. So I would just say continuing the progression of that, and even it's not going to be as successful as it was against Arkansas State. That's a dumb expectation to ever have. But trying to have, or being able to have any success against this Aggie team, I think should be a victory or a moral victory. And Don Brown is not one for moral victories. He has said that multiple times. He does not like moral victories, but
neither does Jimbo. They'd get along on that one.
Yeah, I don't think many coaches do, but I think what he does like is seeing progress within an offense that is probably the worst in the country.
Now, usually I do this predictions thing. I never make people predict an outcome of a game because it's really hard to predict these kinds of things. But I think we both know who we would pick to win this game realistically. So I might make you do it. Give me a little bit of a prediction on how the game's going to go down. I'm not going to make you give me an exact score, but just kind of predict how you think the game would pan out.
I think Texas A&M gets up early because they're pissed, and it's like 21-0. UMass kicks a field goal because they're a conservative team, even though they're really bad. So it'll be like 21-3. And then Texas A&M will score like 3 or 4 more touchdowns, take you to middle to the end of the 4th quarter. And then it's probably going to be like, I don't know, 35 to 7 or to 3, 35 to 10. I think the 33.5 point spread though is very interesting, especially if I'm wrong about what I said before, and this Texas A&M team doesn't come out pissed and UMass kind of finds little ways to take advantage of them. I could realistically seeing this be a game within 4 touchdowns, but I would not bank on that.
That's such a funny line to say. I could see this being within 4 touchdowns, honestly. No, but yeah, I thought when it opened up as 33.5, I was honestly a little bit surprised because I take everything that Vegas gives out as gospel because they do such a good job with everything that they do. There's a reason they always win, but it was interesting to see it be 33.5 because I look at that and I'm like, how many points does A&M have in them? Like looking at this season, how many points do they have in them? So if I'm being realistic, my prediction for this game is, or rather my expectation, what I want to see out of Texas A&M is I want to see them clear 35 points for once in this game. And I think it's going to be interesting because, like I said, they're really banged up on the offense, on the defense, everywhere. This is a broken team, not just kind of like physically, but like even kind of emotionally at some points too. And so I want to see them come out with a fire, and I want to see them say, hey, let's take this game and let's dominate it. We're going to clear 35. We're going to clear 40 points. And so that's kind of what I want to see. And I think your line of 35-10, I could see that being the situation. I'm gonna say 30. I'm gonna say 38-10 though. I think A&M's going to give up a touchdown. I tend to think that teams tend to give up a touchdown, especially like with how weak this team is defensively when it comes to the running attack. I think that at some point UMass is going to be able to capitalize on that, even if it's just for like a singular strong drive. But I'm gonna say 38-10 on that one.
Can I ask you a question really quick?
Yes, hit me.
If Texas A&M finds a way not to lose this game, I don't think that's a possibility, but to make this game close, say like within 21, 3 touchdowns, maybe 20 points. What does that do with everything that is going around about Jimbo Fisher? He's probably getting slandered more than any coach in college football at this current moment. What does that do for all of these conversations surrounding his job, which is going to stay obviously because of the buyout, but just his energy around this head coaching position?
I think you look at the energy that is in College Station, and it's just entirely directed at him. And I think that if A&M does not come out and really establishes themselves in this game, it's just going to, fester even more. And so I'm really interested to kind of see how that goes, because I think that if this is a necessary statement game for A&M, which is crazy to say about a game against UMass, that they have to make a statement against UMass, but it's almost like Jimbo has to prove himself against UMass, and that's kind of absurd to think that we're at this point, So I think that if things don't go extremely in A&M's favor, that's kind of what we're going to see. Is we're just going to see that target get even bigger.
How many people do you expect to be in Kyle Field?
A&M does not go below 90,000, so I would be surprised if it's below 90,000. I'm gonna say a guess. I'm gonna say 96,000. People were camping out over the weekend. I'm just gonna say that.
Against UMass at 11 a.m.
A&M Kyle Field does not go below 90,000. If it goes below 90,000, then Jimbo's gone.
It's at the end of the day, SEC football is SEC football, and UMass has been, I'd say, undoubtedly the worst FBS football program in the country the past 4 years. So for all we know, this could be a 65-0 game. We could be too ahead of ourselves.
I mean, I think that's what A&M fans want to see out of it. All right, I'm going to say thank you so much for joining me today, Joey. Let people know where they can find you, whether that's where you have your work, where they can find you on social media. Just let people know.
So the Daily Collegian, of course, check it out. We cover all UMass sports, but for everything UMass football, if you're a little more intrigued to see what they've been up to this year, if you want to look into that more before the game, just go to thedailycollegian.com. You'll find it under sports and football. Me personally, I'm on Twitter at Joseph Aliberti1. That's ALIBERTI. So yeah, hope you read it and enjoy.
Thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you to all of you who are listening to this episode and have made it to this point. Make sure you check out the other podcasts on the Battalion Network. That includes Calculated Culture, which is our life and arts podcast, and The Bat Signal, which is our news podcast. Thank you again for joining me. And we got one more episode of this left against LSU. I'm so excited. The season's almost over, and we'll see where we go from here. And I'll see y'all next time.